Okay, so the last lecture today we're going to be talking about array methods and then a little bit debugging at the end. This will be the last lecture that's just dedicated to arrays. But so you just finished playing with them, working on traversing them, accessing certain elements in it. There's a lot of great methods that are built in to help you, and you did a little bit of like making your own indexOf, and then we're going to go over indexOf and some of the other ones now. So there's 30 built-in array methods. That's one of the reasons why arrays are so useful in JavaScript, is they have a lot of functionality built into them that you can call on any array. Any array you can call sort on or indexOf on. So that's really nice. You don't have to necessarily memorize all of the array methods like this instance. What I like to do is take one array method a week, get real comfortable with it, do a lot of problems with it, so you can slowly build up your toolbox of array methods. So here are some built-in ones. We're going to go over these a little bit more in detail, but there's a whole list of array methods that are off the prototype, meaning that every instance of an array, you can use it. There are two questions you should ask about every array method before using it. One, does it modify the array it's called on? And two, what does the method return? So going into it, you should be able to sort of know, will I have to reassign this, or is this going to modify the array I made? People have opinions on, like, should you modify the array, should you not? Don't worry about that yet. That's not that big of a deal. You just want to know whether or not you need to reassign it. And then what is it going to return? So for pop modifies it. So you don't have to say fruits equals fruits.pop. It's going to modify it for you. Like fruits will then not have one of those elements. As you can see, it no longer has banana. And pop return, oh yes. That's a good question. I don't think so. I think, so const prevents reassignment, but you can still modify it. Okay. Yeah, but great question. And there are certain frameworks out there that create immutable data types like arrays. I know one specifically is immutable.js. So there are ways to make arrays like non-mutating, but just in general using const, it just prevents you from doing equals again. So pop will return whatever was just removed from the array. So that answers the second question. What does it return? It returns the element that was just removed from the array. In this case, the banana string. So does it modify the array, pop? Yes. What does it return? The removed element. And you can find all this information. You don't necessarily have to memorize it all right now, but it's good to get in the habit of making note what things do. But the documentation will answer all these questions for you. So if you're ever unsure, you can just look up the documentation, and it'll say it does or does not modify it and what it returns. Mutating methods. They're mutative? I don't know how to say that word. Things that do modify the array are called mutative methods. These methods will also have a return value. It varies from thing to thing. But we're going to go over those more now. Okay, so there's many array methods. We're going to talk about these now, but feel free to use whatever methods you find. Look up on documentation. There's a lot out there that are really useful. So if we have our lunch menu again of tacos, pizza, and ice cream, and we want to pop it off. So if we have lunch menu. This should just be this. We haven't changed it. And then we pop it off, and then it should only have tacos and pizza. We're like, we don't want to serve dessert anymore. Our freezer's broken. Notice that I didn't have to do any reassignment for lunch menu because it mutates it itself. And if we capture it, var ice cream equals, we can console log the return value. Ice cream. So this return value is ice cream. Push is sort of the opposite of pop, the yin to the yang of pop. So if we have our lunch menu, and we want to add to it, maybe we just found a great new recipe for, I don't know, what's a food? Coffee. I don't know if there's the recipes out there for coffee, but we'll pretend. If we console log the lunch menu, we'll get this. Now to get the return value, let's console log that out instead of it, and that gives us 4. So what the return value of push is the length of the new array that you just created, 4. So 1, 2, 3, and then 4 with coffee added. Honestly, not as super helpful. I don't really know many times you would use the return value of push, but it's good to note because if the return value is like the array, you can chain things. So the return value will be the new array, like map, which we'll go over more, I believe, next Saturday morning. But push, the return value is 4, so you can't like chain off of it. So yeah, but lunch, we don't have to reassign again because it's mutating. Yeah, so pop is taking it off the back. That's important to note. So it's taking ice cream, the last element. Push adds it to the back. Now, the opposite of adding and removing from the back is adding and removing from the front, and we also have methods for that. We have shift and unshift. A great way I like to remember of which ones add and which ones take off is if there's a U, it's adding to it. So push adds to the back, unshift adds to the front. I like to imagine it's like a teacup holding the new value you're going to add. I don't know if that helps you remember. It helped me because I would always forget shift and unshift. Pop makes sense, push makes sense, but shift and unshift, if it has a U, it's adding to it. So shift doesn't have a U, so it will be taking off the first one. So let's say our tacos, like, I don't know, fish is costing a lot of money. We're like, we don't want to buy fish anymore because it's fish tacos. So if we say lunch menu dot shift, shift doesn't, the ones that take it off doesn't take a value. Shift and pop both don't take any values. The ones that do take values are the ones that are adding to it because it needs to know what to add. So if we console log the lunch menu, then we should only see pizza and ice cream. Cool. And then unshift, like before, we want to add coffee to it, but like to the beginning because it's a drink and that normally goes to the top of the menu. So if we say lunch menu dot unshift, and we put in coffee, and console.log lunch menu, then we should get an array with coffee as the first one added. And the return value of shift is whatever is taken off the front of it. The return value of unshift, I believe, is also the new length count. Yeah, so as before with that. Cool, so length. We've all used length a lot today, especially when traversing. Unlike the other ones we've seen before that are methods, length is a property of the array. It's a property on the instance of the array you have. So we have, you don't have to invoke it because it's not a function. It's just a property on that array. So if we console.log the lunch menu dot length, it'll give us the number of elements in the array, which is really helpful, especially more on the UI side when you want to know how many things are in like a array of products and you want to map them out to be some fun grid. That's really helpful. But yeah, length is a property, you don't invoke it. If we wanted to see the index of, we just did this in our last workshop, we made our own index of. We call it a little bit different than you made yours, just so that you weren't writing like extension methods or prototype. Yeah, so if we wanted to var tacos are, tacos index is a better name, and we do lunch menu dot index of, and then we pass in tacos. And then we need to console.log tacos index. So this should be 0 because it's the first element. Remember arrays, it's 0 with index is the first one. If we have tacos, just like a string with index of, if we have tacos on here twice, it'll still give us the first instance of it. It's not going to find all of them for us. Also with index of, this is JS. Oops. You can give like a from index. So it's an optional one. That's what, so you look up, you're like index of, I forgot what it is. I think you can take it from index. Index of the search element, and then this means optional parameters in the documentation. So you have this from index. And if, for say, you know, the first element is tacos, but I want to see if there's another place in the array that tacos exist, you can pass that in. And in the documentation, just as I was saying, like it gives you a description of what's going on. It'll say whether or not it mutates it, index of doesn't, and it gives the return value of the first index, -1 if not found, just like in a string. So if here I was like tacos from maybe the second index, because I know it's after 0, then it'll give me index 3, which is the last index. Any questions so far on the pop, push, shift, unshift, index of, length? Cool. Okay, slice and splice. They're great. They do very similar things, but are different mainly in they mutate the array. But also you can use splice to add elements to an array. Slice is in string methods as well. So you can call slice on a string or an array. Splice is only for arrays. Okay, so we have our lunch array. And I only want to get the first two elements of it. So var top of menu. Then I can do lunch menu dot slice, and I pass in 0, which is going to be exclusive first element it starts at. So the 0th element, including this. And then the second argument it takes is the end one that you want to stop your slicing of the array at, and it's exclusive. So when I say 2, when I say 2, the index 2 is pizza, it's not going to include it. So it's going to grab these two. It's not going to grab this one. So if then we console.log top of menu, it should just be an array of coffee and tacos. And it returns an array of the selected argument, or of the selected elements. It doesn't mutate it. So then if I console.log the lunch menu, it will still be all the same elements as before. I'm not changing what the original one is. If you don't put any arguments into this, it'll just make a copy. So maybe you want to make it's a common use of slice with no arguments is to make a copy of the array so that you can change it and use mutating methods without changing the original. So this would be like a copy of the menu. If you just put in, let's say 2, which is the start one, remember being inclusive, so it'll include pizza, it'll just go to the end. So this will be pizza and ice cream. So this will be bottom of menu. Oops. You can also do negative numbers with slice. And that just counts from the back. I don't really like it because it's like counting backwards. There's no real need to do it unless you're being super fancy. But if I say -2, which will be 1, 2, it'll then go from whatever that count is to the end. So it should be the same as pizza and ice cream. Yeah. So slice. Really useful, great for making copies if you want to make something like immutable, like if you want to make a copy so you don't mutate the original one. It's also great for like grabbing stuff and not changing it. Yeah. Okay, any questions on that one?
Question for the previous one.
Oh yeah.
indexOf. So like the MVN doc says that like if the optional argument is negative, then it's like offset from the end of the array or something, but it's still searched from front to back. What does that mean?
Yes, great question. So similar how you can put like a negative index here. Let's comment this out. You can do the same with indexOf and the optional from. So instead of 2, if I wanted to do -2, it'll count from the back 1, 2, and it'll start searching here, or here. So ice cream will be the first one it looks at. But again, it'll find the first one it'll find. So if we had tacos, oops. Let's make this -4. So -1, -2, -3, -4. The first one it'll start at is pizza. It should still return this first tacos. So 0, 1, 2, 3. It won't return 4. So even if you do a negative number, it's not going to all of a sudden search backwards for you. Great question. Okay, so splice. Splice, you'll hear people say like splice is evil and stuff. People who are really into functional programming and immutability will, I don't think splice is evil, but it could mess you up if you forget that it mutates your array. So definitely keep that in mind. So just like with slice, the main purpose of splice is to add or to grab a section of the array. So if we say var top of menu equals lunch menu dot splice, and then we want to say from 0, and splice is a little different. It's not saying the end index. The second argument is the number of elements that you want to grab. So you want to start with the 0th and grab 2 elements. So then top of menu should be an array of coffee and tacos. So then if we console log lunch menu, it is going to be whatever was spliced. Or what was, so splice grabs coffee and tacos, and the return value is what was taken from it, and then it removes it from that array. So then lunch menu is now just the pizza and ice cream. So if you are going through your array and like if you have an array of users and you start splicing things off, you could see how you could run into issues if you forget that it mutates it. But the great thing is if you slice first, make a copy of it, and then you splice the copy, you're fine. But if you're using splice to like show pieces of user information on your web page and you've accidentally like removed that from like the big array that you have like in your application, that could be problematic. Okay, another great thing that splice does is it has an optional third element of if you want to add something to it. So let's say I want to remove coffee and put in tea. Like I'm like anti-caffeine right now. So I put in tea. It will take this element. The top of menu will be an array with coffee. That will be removed, and tea will replace this. So top of menu should be an array with just coffee in it. Lunch menu should be tea, tacos, pizza, and ice cream. This can be useful if you want to just like, if you know what index you want to like insert in a value. This can be 0. You don't need to remove anything. You could just put T to the front of it. I mean, you would probably want to use unshift if you know it's going to be to the front just because it's a lot less typing. But if you wanted to add it to the middle, let's do 2. It'll be coffee, tacos, pizza, tea, ice cream. And in that case, since nothing's being removed, it returns an empty array. Because the return value is an array of whatever was removed. You can also do negative numbers as before. So if you wanted to start -1, remove 1 element, and add in tea, it'll take out ice cream and replace it with tea. Any questions on splice? These take a little bit of getting used to playing with them. Also, I'm not going to lie, sometimes I forget, does splice is the second argument like the end index, or is it the number of elements? You know, there's a lot you have to remember and hold in your head, especially when you're first learning it. Look at the documentation because that'll give you all your answers. Or, I mean, just like console log out and be like, what does it do? But yeah. Cool. So we went over indexOf. Again, returns a -1 if it's not present. The from parameter is useful if you want to like find all the things. Slice, it returns a portion of the array and it doesn't mutate. Splice, it does mutate and it returns what was removed from the array. So like I was saying, use documentation. JavaScript documentation is great. It gives you examples. Get comfortable with reading it, because if you're at home, you might not always have someone that you can just like call up at 3 in the morning to be like, hey, what does this method do? Getting used to looking at documentation. Also, once you get a job, being able to read documentation instead of bothering your boss every minute is really useful, because like they don't want to spend their day explaining things to you that you could look up. They want to explain things to you that you can't look up. Okay. Any questions on arrays? Covered a lot of methods. There's a lot more out there. Array methods are great, but they take practice. We'll go over more array methods Saturday morning. Okay, cool. We're going to go into debugging. Take a quick, 5-minute to get water and relax. And we'll start back at 4:20, so 3 minutes, I guess. Okay, debugging. Debugging is key, and if you can find a way to make it fun and sort of fuel your energy, the more fulfilled and excited you'll be about programming, because a lot of debugging happens, both code that you've written and code other people have written. It's a natural part of the development process. The steps for writing code, you visualize the logic, you write the code, and then you debug it. But it's never that straightforward of boom, boom, boom. You're going to visualize it, you're going to write some code, you'll debug it. Then you'll maybe visualize it some more, debug some more. It's an iterative process that just never stops. So learning good debugging early really helps, and it saves you a lot of time so you can write more code, because the less time you're searching through the code of where something's going wrong, the more time you can be making a thing. So here there's this nice visual of time debugging, 75%, time writing code, 25%. Some days for me, it's 2 days of debugging for 5 lines of code. So that happens, but it's really, in a nice way, fun. Because a lot of the things, especially as a new developer, will be fixing bugs that are already in the app. Because in full stack and Grace Hopper, you'll be making a lot of things from the ground up, and you're the one that wrote almost every line of code, and you know what everything is doing, which is great. But then once you get in the real world, you'll have an application of thousands of files that other people have written that might not be at the company anymore, and there's a problem going wrong, and you have to hunt down where the problem is going wrong. So learning debugging now will help you be more of a rock star in the field. A great tool for debugging is console logging. Logging out what a thing is really useful, because maybe it's null when you think it's going to be a number, or is expenses, you're treating something like it's an expense, but really it's revenue. But writing good console logs and writing console logs are very different. You can just throw a bunch of console logs somewhere and it'll do stuff, but it might not give you good information. So this is a example. Here is some things. I don't really know what it's doing. We've put a lot of console logs in because we heard good debugging is console logging. And we're console logging variables. Sometimes it's in a while loop or a for loop. Sometimes it's just out here. If we add things, sort of labels to our console log, oops. Let's fork this. If we add information to our console logs of what we're console logging, we're able to tell better what is going on in it. And a thing to get used to now, which was really stressed to me when I was in the program, was putting a string. Oh, I missed one. Here. Putting a string along with the value you're console logging of what you're logging. It doesn't have to be the variable name, but that's common a lot of times. That will give you a better output. So that way when you're tracking things, it might be in several different files that you have a console log. You don't know. So being able to track like what you're logging out where is much better than being like, this number is either profits or revenue, but I don't know. And it helps you, even just console logging, like I'm in the if statement, I do all the time. And it really helps narrow down, like, am I getting to this piece of code? Maybe, maybe not. So yeah, console logs, but good console logs, things with descriptions, putting a string in there is nice. Some other things to do, or not to do with console logs. Like I was showing before with the nested arrays, if you have it too nested, JavaScript's not going to like traverse your whole nested array. It's just going to spit out this. So make sure you're accessing exactly what you want, not like a whole object of things. Console logging out like the exact value that you're looking at is much more useful. Also, don't do operations in console logs. Sometimes you might want to invoke a function in a console log. Better to name a variable for the return value of that function and then console log the variable. Don't like increment a thing in your console log because it's just sloppy and it's not really going to give you much use because you're console logging to find out what something is and you're changing it in the console log. And remember the differences between a return and console log. I think we talked about that yesterday in types when we were talking about functions. Returning is different than console logging, but you can console log what a return value from an array or from a function is. Logging at strategic points is key. Logging out like what this new string is once you've gone through the for loop is great. But also including a log maybe inside the loop as you're adding to the string is also super helpful to make sure you're adding the thing that you think you're adding every time. And again, include strings. Like I said, inside nested for loop, that can be helpful to make sure you know where you're getting to, and the element is this. Any questions on console logs, strategies for them? You'll get better. The more you practice with it, the better you get. So start now. When I'm building a function, I like to include console logs as I go to make sure I'm doing the things I think I'm doing as I'm doing them. Instead of writing like some huge function that does a huge thing, writing a function like step by step and really building it can help, and console logs can help with that. And then interpreting error messages. We had the great question earlier today about the different types of error messages, and you can look up the documentation on them. Also, being able to read an error message is the best thing that you can get good at. Knowing like what the type is it a type error, reference error, syntax error, and then it will give some sort of message description, but it'll also give you a line number where the error was being thrown. So that line number is, let's see if we can. So we're here. If I said console log x, x doesn't exist, so I should get a reference error of like x is not defined. So reference error x is not defined at line 53. So then you can come here, 53, x is not defined, what? And then this second number is 13, of 13 is like the character in, but that one I don't really look at. I just look at the line because you shouldn't have like some huge line where you're like, where is X? Like it should be pretty obvious based on the message and the line number what's going on. Also, if you're in an application where it's like functions within or calling functions, it'll give you a stack trace. Those are good to get good at reading, but I don't think I can think of an example of doing a stack trace here. But just having the line will save you a lot of time hunting down when I'm calling X and where it's not defined. Also, error messages might be misleading. Like mine's, no, that one's not misleading. Here, it's missing a parentheses. Syntax errors are always sort of misleading because it's always like unexpected token this. It's never the token. But having sort of like the, with the function hoisting and stuff, like if var x equals function that console logs, and you call it before you get to that line, it'll say like x is not function, and it is. No, that's not a misleading one. I can't think of a I don't know. Error messages can be misleading, so take it with a grain of salt. Like, read it, go to the line, but if it's not exactly what is going on, like, don't be alarmed. Like, that happens. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, if I can think of a misleading error message, I'll definitely pull it up. But any questions on debugging and, like, error messages and console logging? Debugging can be really fun. I personally like it because it's like I'm a detective, I'm Sherlock Holmes. Like I have this bug. At work a lot of times it'll be like, here's this bug that this client found and I have to recreate it. Sometimes that can take 2 days because I have to be a fancy footwork person to recreate it because it's in some weird state, and then I can track down where in the app this error is being thrown or it's not acting as we expect it to be acting. So it can be really fun. Try to find the joy in it because it really does make your life a lot more enjoyable and better when you get good at debugging. Okay, cool. I am going to...
What was in the